Hey guys, welcome back. Apologies for not getting a video out for a couple of weeks, but I've had a pretty sort of full-on last 3-4 weeks, and I'll go into that a bit. Catch you up on what's been going on with the treatment and myself, and the kind of wins and losses we've had in the whole situation. So the last video I did, Courtney and I went away for a little bit of a getaway for a couple of days, just sort of clear my head. And at that time it was sort of a few days before my last treatment of, say, the second cycle of chemo that I was doing, and I was having a PET scan to follow up after that week to sort of track how the treatment was going. Before I even went for the scan, I kind of had the feeling that maybe the treatment wasn't being so effective. If you remember one of the earlier videos that I did, it was about using some essential oils and some other, if I was not in Australia, cannabis-based oils. Let's just call it hemp oil for now. And I did a bit of a tincture up to sort of rub on the swelling I sort of had in my kind of lymph nodes in my chest here, just to see it would help with the swelling in any way, because it's a anti-inflammatory sort of tincture that I put together. It didn't really work on any swelling. It was just something I thought I would try anyway. So I kind of stopped that after a couple of weeks, because I was actually having trouble sleeping with the smell of the essential oils. And if you're someone that's been through chemo, you would know that your smell and your taste is just off the Richter scale on how sensitive you are about things and stuff. So it was really affecting my sleep. On top of that, I have been on steroids for the treatment as well, so you can't really sleep when you're on steroids, and it was kind of really messing with my sleeping pattern. So I stopped the essential oils. Then we had the scan, and what happened with the scan was it came back basically that the treatment had no effect and wasn't effective at all. So all my sort of cancerous areas that were there were still pretty much exactly the same after 2 rounds or 2 cycles of chemo, which is about 4 treatments in that time. So it was sort of kind of a heavy week for us, because you go in and get that news, and then it's kind of like just you've been through all this sort of suffering for nothing, and then on top of that you sort of feel like you're starting back from square one again. So what happened basically is I got rushed back in for another surgical biopsy. They took another lymph node out of my armpit area here. What they wanted to do was basically retest it to make sure that they were still dealing with Hodgkin's lymphoma, because apparently there's, when you have in the stages 3 and 4 and the disease is progressing that way, people can get what you call double hit and triple hit lymphomas, which you have 2 or 3 different types of cancerous cells within the same sort of metastasizing area, I guess you could call it. So they just wanted to go in and check that it was still dealing with just plain old Hodgkin's lymphoma. By the way, whoever coined the phrase that when you say to someone you got Hodgkin's lymphoma or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they go, "Oh, you got the good one, you got the good cancer." Whoever said that the first time, I want to kick him in the shins really hard, because I can tell you there's been nothing good about this process so far. Like, other than my perspective and my mindset on life, and how that area and aspect of your life changes in many different ways, and you appreciate the small things, but it's not the good type. Trust me, it's a very hard journey. So what happened? I had the biopsy. It came back still dealing with just classical Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was a good thing, because having that triple and double and triple hit lymphomas, your sort of prognosis takes a sharp dive downwards, and it's a little bit harder to treat. So what we've now done is, instead of escalating similar treatment that I had, sort of taken a step sideways, and I'm on a different type of treatment altogether. It's called GDP, if anyone's interested to know. It's usually, they call it RGDP, so the R drug they'll have in there. For whatever reason with me, they wanted to do it without the R, which is a drug called Rituxan. And mainly because I was concerned about issues, I think, because from the start of the journey, I said to them, the minimal amount of cardiotoxic drugs that we have in this treatment, the better for me, because we've got sort of a history of cardiovascular disease in the family. And then the rates of people that sort of pass away from heart failure and cardiovascular disease post chemo treatment is something up in near the 40% range within sort of a decade if you stay in remission. So the oncologist has been pretty good at listening to sort of my requests on that, and he said the GDP itself will be pretty effective even without the Rituxan. But the journey doesn't stop there. So after I go through these rounds of treatment, then they're looking at doing a stem cell transplant. If you don't know anything about that, I've since found out it's going to be a pretty tough thing to have to go through. And the suckiest thing about it, I guess, is that I'm going to have to go and do a stem cell transplant, and you have to be admitted to hospital, and you can be in there for between 2 and 4 weeks, however long it takes you to recover. Basically, they just give you a big dose of chemo that kills everything right down to your bone marrow, and then they transplant your own stem cells back into you after they've done a harvest, and basically start your system back, bone marrow, immune system from scratch with your own stem cells. So it's like you're being a baby born again, and that sort of hopes to kind of keep you in remission, I guess. It's what they call a second line treatment. So what would happen is, if this first treatment I did completely worked fine, and then I come back 2 years later and I've relapsed and the disease came back, this is the treatment that they would do. But because I've sort of had no response to the first treatment, they're just jumping straight on this, and hopefully we get some results. The plus side is that with all the swelling I had in my chest and my armpit and everything, right after this first treatment completely went down and completely disappeared, and it seems to be staying that way. The downside is I'm still getting this swelling sort of around my spleen area, and the reason I hadn't done a video is because I actually spent about 5 or 6 days in hospital a couple of weeks ago, and it was between when I had the second biopsy and starting this new treatment. And what happened was this fluid built up around my spleen because of the inflammation between treatments, and it collapsed my left lung down the bottom. So I was in an excruciating amount of pain, and I couldn't really breathe properly at all. That was a pretty tough week, because when you start to get signs and symptoms and pain like that and you can't breathe because of the disease kind of pushing on your lungs, it becomes a pretty scary and real thing pretty quick. Like, I remember Courtney and I sat at the lounge out there one morning, and we both cried for about 15 minutes or so, because you sort of thought, like, this is progressing so fast, and I was in so much pain, and it was like, is this sort of the end of the line? But the doctors sort of really reassured me that, it's just a little hiccup and a little speed bump. I've had a really good specialist. I've been really lucky with that, I think. And so he sort of reassured me that, there's plenty of options with lymphoma, because it is such a highly treatable and curable disease. They have options A, B, C, D, and it can even come down to just sort of disease management long term if they can't cure you. So, hoping to get a few years out of me yet. But so far, this treatment seems to be working, which is a really big plus. So, sorry I haven't been able to do a video, because I've actually been pretty crook. Obviously, like I said, I got rushed in for a biopsy about a week following I had the fluid build up and my lung collapsed. Then I spent 5 or 6 days in hospital, basically. Had the first chemo infusion while I was in hospital, dealing with that pain. If you have anything ever go wrong with your lung, it's the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like, they had me on morphine, they had me on fentanyl, they had a fentanyl port that was just constantly hooked up to my arm, and they came and give me fentanyl every hour on the hour to kind of deal with the pain. That's how bad it was. This time around, obviously with the first chemo, my side effects weren't too bad. Like obviously it was you have a really bad sort of 4 or 5 days. So I'll draw out a bit of a timeline if you're somebody that's sort of following and you have to go through this and you want to know what it's like. The first chemo I was on is called ABVD, which treats 80 to 90% of lymphomas that exist, basically. Hodgkins mainly, I think, and it's they call it a lighter chemo, even though it makes you pretty crook. But they said as far as the chemos go, it usually works unless you're in a higher stage of disease. They thought it was going to be 50-50 with me because it was at stage 4. The side effects I didn't get any of the mouth sores. A lot of people get mouth sores and ulcers and all that sort of stuff. I've always had really good dental health on my teeth. Always been sort of real straight, and I've always kept them real clean. I don't have any fillings, never had any holes. So I think that may contribute to the fact why I didn't get mouth sores, because I've always had real good sort of dental health. I got the real bad sort of nausea for 4 or 5 days, and then there wasn't really too many bad side effects. Bit of constipation, if you really want to know. That sucks. I haven't been constipated since I was a kid, and I forgot how bad that was. Forget a collapsed lung. You can't go to the toilet for like 3 days. God, that's bad. So yeah, and then I sort of said to the doctor, because I've come across people who also get real minimal side effects from chemo. I said to the doctors, look, was it a sign that it wasn't working because I had these sort of real minimal kind of side effects? And they said, not really. It's not uncommon for someone of my age, it's sort of early 30s or say late 20s, and if you're sort of fit and healthy, to get minimal side effects from that. And so I kind of dealt with that quite well. This new one really sucks. This is not really any other way to put it. I've never had experienced nausea like that in my life. It also creates gut toxicity, which is like, just feels like you have really, really bad cramping, stinging, like the gastro sort of thing all the time, but then you can't necessarily go to the toilet either, so that really sucks. There was a good 3-4 days straight that I just sat right here where I'm sitting, reclined back, and barely just was able to drink water. There was a couple of mornings where I couldn't even really get out of bed. I just sort of had to lay there and sort of said to Courtney, this really sucks, I don't think I can move. And those are the times it gets pretty tough, especially for her as well, because she sort of has to watch me go through it. So when those mornings I can't get out of bed, she gets pretty upset and she cries, and then it makes me upset. But these are just some of the things that you have to deal with when you've got the good type of cancer. A person needs to be kicked in the shins. I'm going to wrap it up there. It's probably pretty long already. I'm going to do another video right now, but I'll do it in another one in case you don't want to watch a real long video, just about some of the medications and some more of the side effects and some of the things I've been doing to help support myself through the whole process. So thanks again for watching. I'll put my GoFundMe link in the video description as well. Obviously this is a long drawn out journey, and I haven't been able to work because I've been pretty crook, and now Courtney finishes up maternity leave next week. Our baby's due in 8 weeks time. Obviously I don't expect anybody to donate, but if it's something you feel like you can do to help support us through this whole situation, it'd be really great. But thank you anyway for just the comments and liking and subscribing. I'm finding that people with real positive comments and stuff in there, which is just absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.